From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
As well as Jeff McClain, our executive producer. Great to have all of you here. As always, this time every week, we talk about the law, and today we're focusing on a trial that literally ended before it began.
Right.
I mean, it came to an end.
Sudden
we're talking,
stop.
Yeah, sudden stop. We're talking about Alec Baldwin. Of course, we all know now, it's been going on for several years, what happened on the set of Rust. But I guess first, Greg, let's just jump right into it. Let's talk about this. This was a trial. Everybody was seated, ready to go, and then all of a sudden, it ended. So what happened?
Well, it ended abruptly, and the judge said the prosecution's failure to turn over evidence, which was some live bullets, was, quote, scorching prejudice.
Right.
And it was a complete, let me think of the polite term, circus erupted in the courtroom, because during the course of the day when the motion to dismiss was argued, you had one prosecutor, they were both specially appointed prosecutors, resign from the case. One prosecutor called herself to the stand saying that the live rounds had no evidentiary value, and you had a judge saying, enough of this, case dismissed, and the rest is history. Alec Baldwin left the courtroom crying.
Well, let's talk, Greg, about what that evidence was and how it came to pass. This was not something that, it literally walked in the door.
Yeah. That's the way to put it.
It literally walked in the door, Jeff. And, you know, historically, you have the case. You would think somebody as savvy as Alec Baldwin would know not to give statements. But there's an accidental shooting, as we know, on the set of Rust. Thought the gun was not loaded with blanks. Alec Baldwin points the gun. He was given by Mr. Hall, and there's a fatality. Then there was back and forth, wrongful death lawsuit filed on whether he would be charged. Public announcement that Alec Baldwin would not be charged with voluntary manslaughter, but he gave an interview. And in the interview, he said, I did not pull the trigger, the gun misfired. So now he's locked into a defense. I will tell you, one of the hardest things to prove forensically is that a gun misfires, because let me tell you, 9 times out of 9 times out of 9 times, guns do not misfire. So prosecution then rushes, gets an expert, forensic report. Alec Baldwin's interview, he's not being candid, truthful, we're going to charge him. The armor who was charged with keeping live rounds out of the gun, which based on, I believe, the live shooting that killed Bruce Lee's son, the rule in Hollywood, the guild, is you've got to have somebody on the set to make sure the gun's not loaded. Pretty simple concept. She was convicted, but during her trial, they get a private investigator to go look for evidence that may be on the crime scene. So this guy, who was related to her, an ex-police officer, finds some live rounds. And he goes to the police station and gives it to one of the evidence people, because I'd like to turn this in. This is evidence in the Rust case. So it wasn't part of the initial police investigation. It wasn't done by law enforcement. So this Good Samaritan private investigator hands him the evidence. Prosecutors poo-poo it, don't turn it over, and this comes out during the trial and the case explodes. So really interesting how this has played out in the media, Bo and Jeff, because you know, everyone is spinning it that the prosecutors withheld intentionally this evidence, and once you have a jury impaneled, the stakes are up, because once there's a finding of manifest necessity for a mistrial, that means a jury's impaneled and there's prejudice, then double jeopardy it has attached, and you can never be prosecuted again. But think about this. In any case, if a investigator, Good Samaritan, comes in, goes to the sheriff's department and says, here's some evidence I'd like to use in State versus McClain. There you go. Have a nice afternoon. And the prosecutors overlook it, don't see it, ignore it, and a case is dismissed. A really bizarre series of facts, and the reaction of the judge, quite frankly, surprised me.
Your Honor, since I'm the one on trial here, I'd like to posit that there's no solid chain of custody on this evidence, and how could it have any probative effect on my case?
You're exactly right. So imagine this: you have somebody not as a part of law enforcement, unsolicited, gives you the here, Bo, here's some evidence in the case, and you're like, okay, let me put it in the police report right here. And then lo and behold, prosecutors are resigning, they're testifying, judges are throwing out the case and saying it's scorching prejudice.
So how should they have handled that?
Yeah, I was going to say, how should they handle that? I mean,
what they should have done is had a hearing and determine whether withholding, a two-step process, withholding the evidence was malicious or intentional, whether there was prosecutorial misconduct on this discovery violation. And then if I'm the judge, I'm going to ask, what probative value, what forensic value do these rounds have to this case, this gun, and the ballistics report? Because just to go out in the field, I mean, you can drive up and down Magnolia Avenue, and I did this in a murder case last year, there's just shell casings all over the road where crime scenes happen because they're in high crime areas. This was an area where people would do target practice, rural, etc. So to me, it was really interesting how everyone, there you go, man, walked out the door.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Okay, obviously you went to school, you studied law. Mine comes from like John Grisham novels, but I just read, matter of fact, the book I just finished talks about this. If you could kind of explain to everybody, what is the rule if you come in contact with evidence? You have to notify, don't you have to make the other side aware of what's going on? And in this case, the defense was like, wait a minute, hey, we didn't know anything about this.
It's very simple. One, there is the rules of procedure. For example, in federal court, in Tennessee, Rule 16 requires there to be an exchange of evidence. But there's constitutional authority, and it's Brady versus Maryland and Kiles versus Whitley. And those cases hold that its evidence is exculpating, means likely to prove innocence, or it's favorable. Okay, it could help the defendant. Then you, as a prosecutor, have a duty to notify and turn it over. So think about that. While you're trying to put someone behind bars, then you've got this mental gymnastics where you're going, well, that might be helpful to Jeff McClain, so I better give him all this stuff. But to me, the thing that just drives me crazy about this factual scenario is, and I've never seen where sheriff's departments just allow someone to knock on the door and here's a sack of evidence in this case, and
then on their way they go.
Their way they go. And then I guess the evidence tech should have called the prosecutor. Prosecutor should have said, well, I'll just look at this random evidence that has emerged. But
it's an interesting twist. I mean, I don't think anybody saw this one coming, obviously.
And I guess, Greg, that does raise the question about, so the armor we mentioned, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, she's already been convicted, is en route to serve an 18-month sentence, I believe. And now she wants her case retried. She wants out. And does her arguments hold water here?
Well, I don't think so, because I think it would be a different standard for her, because she would have to prove that the shells, live rounds, would have made a difference in a motion for new trial or a motion to set aside the verdict. That wasn't the case in Alec Baldwin's case. This motion was predicated on the fact that it was maliciously, intentionally withheld. And the prosecution said, even if we'd have given it to you, it wasn't helpful, it wasn't exculpating, it wasn't favorable. So different standard for her, but why not? But it's interesting when you talk about bullets, talk about evidence. She was charged with obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and she was acquitted of that count. And someone connected with her camp are the ones that found the live rounds. So
interesting. That's true.
She has effectively helped Alec Baldwin, but didn't help herself.
Right.
She hired a prosecutor. She had someone that was acting as an investigator to basically win Alec Baldwin's case.
Basically, a relative helped her out.
Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, but
it's still civil lawsuits out there.
They're still going. Some were settled, but I'm just really intrigued by the fact that I can hire a private investigator and have them drive to the sheriff's department and say, Sheriff Spangler, evidence in the Smith case got to go, and you run up down the road, and then so the prosecutor's got a hot potato, and I mean, think about that. Were they obligated to forensically analyze the bullets? No chain of custody.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, because this was found. Let's see, this shooting happened in 23.
No, 21.
21.
3
The
years
trial
ago. Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it happened.
these
It was
bullets-
brought in the last day of her trial.
Right.
Right. So who knows when these rounds were placed at the scene, even if they were placed at the scene.
Yeah.
So, but to me, sometimes truth, life imitates art, whatever.
And you
But-
said jeopardy's attached here, so that's
done.
it.
It's done.
Alec Baldwin could stand up and say, "I never liked the guy, and I pulled the trigger, and he got what was coming to
there's
him.
nothing that-
Nothing
and
they
there's
could do.
nothing they could do."
All right.
But again, if Alec had not given the interview,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have got this far.
That's true. Would have been over earlier, I guess. Hey, thank you so much, Greg. As always, of course, we're going to have much more for you on WATE coming up at 5:30. We'll be talking more about this. And, of course, we always love to hear from you as well if you ever have a question. Again, thanks so much for joining us.